Hello and welcome, everyone. How are you going? We are live. I know some of you thought we would be starting earlier, but well, I mean, it's a Sunday and there's a lot of things going on. And actually, to be honest, I think it's almost good that we started this now, because at the time of recording or streaming, Assad is in Moscow. As I predicted a week ago, he fled. He fled Syria, and he didn't go to Iran. He didn't go to UAE or something that some numbnuts on Twitter was suggesting. He went to Russia because Russia is the only place that was willing to go to the extent to uphold Assad for as long as he did. Now he's gone. So that's one of the things. But anyway, we are here with Michael Rossi, who hosts his fantastic show in translations on YouTube. And if you're not familiar with him, I encourage you to go and have a look at his stuff. If you like to watch videos where the translation is directly what is said by Putin or other Russian entities there, and not sort of, I don't know, a Western version, then I recommend you look at his channel. He's also great excitingness. That's not even a word. 50,000. I want to get that straight out the gate. Michael, We're working our own way there, but yeah, it's lovely to have you back, Michael. You were the first YouTuber who was kind enough to stream and join me on a show a year and a half ago and stuff. So it's great to have you here as well. And for people who are watching, who are from Michael's community, I'm doing a lot of coverage on Syria at the moment, but we do touch upon Russia largely. And so I welcome you to, check out my channel as well, or engage with both our parties, because we do cover a lot of great stuff. And we have some different opinions on things, but I think in this conversation, we're largely going to be in agreement in terms of where we think things are going to go and the precarious aspect to that, and generally that it's not all rose tinted, guys, that's for sure. But anyway, Michael, how are you? And where you're coming from, the US right now, right?
I'm back in the US. Yes. So New York time. And yeah, I think it was actually good that our meeting was postponed, just because of the three things that have come through the pipeline since I posted just a little teaser video earlier today. As you mentioned, Assad is alive. There's no visual confirmation, although the Telegram channels are saying that he has landed in Russia. He's with his family, so we'll have to take that at face value. The second is, again, take it as is. The new transition government has issued security guarantees for Russia's naval bases in Western Syria, the Russian naval bases in Tartus and Latakia. And third, the IDF has taken control of Mount Hebron, if I'm not mistaken the name, which effectively gives them a absolute strategic hold over what they've already occupied in Golan Heights. But this is pretty clear that Israel is declaring a security cordon sanitaire around its areas to keep the rest of the ragtag rebel groups from doing anything silly or foolish.
Yeah, so couple things as it stands. I'm currently just also making a quick tweet because I remember 10 years ago when Assad made the comments that when was it Yanukovych? Yeah, Yanukovych, when he fled Ukraine, he said, "I am not Yanukovych and I am not going anywhere." 10 years later, he's gone somewhere, namely Moscow, and fled or run away. So anyway, kind of ironic, but yeah, jokes aside, the Golan Heights, I think, is going to be complicated. I am finalizing a video that I'll be posting after our conversation with Michael, which discusses the main winners and losers of the conversation. And Israel, I think, could come out of this potentially beneficial. But from what I understand, they are considering going fully into the Golan Heights, annexing it, and then some, including creating some kind of buffer zone. I'm not entirely sure how well that's going to go down, but equally with Trump in office, he's not really going to care. He wants Israel to take the lead in terms of managing the Middle East, because his focus is on China, and Iran is obviously a strategic priority of his, but mainly is in he's going to sanction the hell out of it, and he wants maximum pressure put back. So Syria is not going to be a massive care for him, I think, mainly just from a strategical, like whatever he can get from it. He doesn't really care who leads it as long as they don't threaten America and American citizens. Will he withdraw the US troops in the northeast, for example? What's your take there?
No, I don't think you got to remember when he was president, he had said something like, we had secured the oil, we got the oil, we took the oil. He kept using the word oil constantly, right? I mean, it's just like you're saying the quiet part out loud. But it was the closest thing that Trump ever came to imitating John Bolton, who is kind of like a John Foster Dulles on discount, who basically just looks at the rest of the world as, how much of this planet can be exploited for American national interests. So my guess is, and I'm going to preface a lot of this today by saying, unless I'm very wrong, but the United States is going to maintain some kind of presence in a post-Assad Syria simply because so many other countries are going to maintain a presence. Most of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which has been supported and financed by Turkey, and we should get to Turkey in just a couple of minutes here, they're going to have a notable presence in Syria's north, in particular, maintaining a stranglehold on the Kurdish resistance, who I have to say, the Kurds put up far more of a fight than the Syrian government army did, because for them, I mean, this is really more a battle of life and death. If we are to take the latest things coming regarding Russia seriously, and this goes into, my opinion, why Russia was kind of mum in the last couple of days. They didn't really put up much of a fight in backing or propping up Assad. Perhaps, again, we won't know about this until far later. There might have been some kind of back channel communication saying, Russia, if you stay out of this, Tartus Latakia are still yours. Don't do anything. Don't interfere. And that's exactly what they did. Again, the Telegram channels say one thing, and to my understanding, not a single Russian soldier has been killed yet in this latest conflict. So Russia is going to be there. Israel is going to be there. Unless Trump completely outsources this to the Israeli government, I can't see a reason why the United States would want to withdraw from what is now effectively a carved up post-Assad Syrian state.
Yeah, I think that there is an opportunity for the US here to try to facilitate some kind of dialogue between the Syrians and Israel, for example. So, Trump will want to do what? He wants to build on his Abraham Accords. Notably, I think he wants to certainly get Israel and Saudi Arabia on formalized, officially formalized. They are basically, normalized, but they want to be official, right? Public. And I think he's going to try to, but they could, if they played their cards right, try to do that with Syria as well, right? Get them to recognize Israel. And then that's another, from the Israeli perspective, headache that can be reduced at least. Obviously, if they do go physically into the Golan Heights and do something there, that is illegal under international law, but not that Netanyahu really cares about that. And again, I don't really see the US stopping that unless it causes, significant destabilization within Syria and the HTS-led coalition or whatever the heck could be. Say, well, we will do something against Israel, because then that could give the US a headache. So maybe the Trump administration will put pressure on Tel Aviv there, on Jerusalem there. But the other thing I think about the US perspective is also how this plays into Iran, because what this has done, and agree with me or not, Michael, it has once again illustrated that without its proxies, the Islamic Republic are extremely vulnerable. Their ability to enact effective deterrence, right, through their use of plausible deniability, this whole idea that, they can say it wasn't us, it was our it was Hezbollah, we don't know what you're talking about, right? They can't do that anymore, partially because they launched 2 sets of major direct strikes on Israel earlier in the year, but equally because, well, 2 of their main proxies, including a nation state, have gone, which is huge. So I don't know, what do you think about the sort of the
I mean, Iran is one of the biggest losers in all of this. Not the biggest loser, but they are one of the more strategic losers in all of this, because they've lost their land bridge to Lebanon. And if nothing else, again, we have to see how this plays out. But if this is instrumental in cutting Iranian aid off to Hezbollah in Lebanon, this is probably the least confrontational approach to neutralizing Iran's presence within Lebanon, short of like open engagement. It remains to be seen what Netanyahu will do. It also remains to be seen what the Iranian government will do, although they have already said that the future of Syria is now solely and entirely the responsibility of the Syrian people. They seem to have also have washed their hands of the Assad government. And whether this is, Monday morning quarterbacking or whether this is actually true, both Iran and Russia have now sort of come out and said, well, we have been warning Assad for months about HTS. Right, we've been warning them about these Turkish-paid radicals and mercenaries. We've been warning them about what Israel might do. Take our advice and let us help you out. And according to them, right, Assad has ignored everything. So Assad is being thrown under the bus. The Russians have basically said that he was suddenly now ineffective, that his government was teetering on the brink of collapse, that the Syrian army gave up without a fight because there was no loyalty to the country anymore. There was no reason to fight to defend a regime that they no longer believed in. And the Iranians are basically saying the same thing. Now, this might be just simply a way of diplomatically washing their hands of the whole matter. But, once the dust settles and 8 o'clock Monday morning comes around, what does that say about Iran's leverage in Lebanon? If there is going to be any leverage anymore, or will this be extended to Iraq, which I wouldn't put it past Trump to actually do that, or at least look the other way, give a green light to Netanyahu to continue to effectively be the emerging strongman within the region. Turkey will most likely do little beyond keeping the Kurds in Iraq like they are in Syria at bay. And it's a way. I was just sort of looking into the comments here. One person said Erdogan wins big time. Yeah, I mean, Erdogan is the hero of the hour in many cases. I mean, he has proven himself time and time again to be absolutely resourceful in mobilizing mercenary groups outside of the country to get what he wants. And he effectively sent mercenaries into Azerbaijan to destroy Karabakh. He's doing that now within northern Syria. I wouldn't put it past him to do that if push came to shove within Iraq. So, if we're kind of looking for, who's the biggest winner and who's the biggest loser, I think right now, as much as I hate to admit it, and I'm no friend of Erdogan's whatsoever, but Erdogan, I'm no fan of him whatsoever. But, the man he's a snake. I just got to say, the guy just basically will play both sides until whatever.
Yeah, they say he's a snake oil salesman. I would just say, so we've got, if you want to put it on a spectrum, right, I don't think it's not 100%. None of this is like absolute, right? It's not an absolute win for Turkey, but it's certainly a relative win for them. It's pretty much an absolute loss for Iran. Russia is a bit more complicated, and I think we'll probably spend the majority of the, conversation on Russia, given that's our regional expertise is. But for me, it's pretty clear. Turkey is by far the biggest benefactor. Maybe that's a better way to put it. And the biggest, what's the opposite of benefactor, guys? Right in the comments, I don't know. The opposite of benefactor, right, is Iran. Russia's sort of fascinator. Israel, it's different. I think that depends largely on what happens in Syria. The US, I don't think, is as relevant initially. Obviously, they have a footprint there, but they're not, immediate. So I think it's and to Foxy's comment, I disagree. I certainly think that the Saudis have made it clear that their strategic priorities overset or overcome their humanitarian obligations to the Palestinians. I'd love a two-state solution for sure, but I don't think Saudi Arabia or MBS particularly cares enough. If he can get strategical stability and security with the Israelis by normalizing ties, I think he will prioritize that, and he would have done more towards supporting the Palestinians if he really cared about a two-state solution. He doesn't. He would have, he would have taken them in. He would have done something. He hasn't. So I don't agree with you that. I do think we will see Saudi-Israeli ties formalized. Maybe not. I could be wrong, but the extent to which the Abraham Accords were made, I think it was pretty good. But anyway, yeah. And then and thank you actually, Buddy, for the comment. You've just reminded me the point I wanted to ask you, Michael, is obviously internally, right? So let's dissect a bit from your perspective. I am delighted to see Assad depart, but I am not at all happy nor comfortable with the post-war Syria. Okay, HTS is a group that was affiliated with Al Qaeda, and the gentleman whose name I've forgotten it at this moment, he did a PR stunt with CNN. Are we going to genuinely take at face value that this is a fully reformed man who doesn't have some pretty strong Islamist perspectives? No, I don't think so. So I'm still very skeptical and pretty cautious. But equally, so people who are on the internet celebrating that this is, the chance of a new democratic Syria. No, guys, come on. No. I hope Syrian people have the opportunity to lead that, but I'm very worried about it still. And equally, obviously, the Kurds. I think the Kurds are a group that could really be an important role here. This is why I say that I think Turkey's not 100% winning, because it's still a little bit of a calculation that Ankara has to get right in terms of how they now deal with a much more emboldened set of Kurdish forces. But anyway, I've laid a lot of random thoughts out there. What's your thoughts on any of this?
So the guy that you were talking about, his name is Abu Muhammad al-Jolani. He's the guy that went on to CNN, right? He's the reformed jihadist, a member of Al-Qaeda 3.0, intersectional ISIS is what we can call it now. Salafism with pronouns. Yeah, I've seen the error of my way. I mean, look, if you honestly believe that, then you not only subscribe to the Washington Post and the New York Times, but you actually subscribe to the premium version so you can get all the features and actually believe everything that Tom Friedman says. I mean, come on. I mean, this is such, ridiculous.
The Western media again.
Just such gaslighting. It's not even funny. I mean, just give me a break here. I mean, so they're not cutting people's heads off in the public square. They're just hanging them. All right. So, yeah, it's a kinder, gentler form of jihadism, but look, we will find, in all seriousness, we will find out how genuine he is in the coming days and weeks when it really comes to Syria's minorities, the Kurds, the Alawites, the Druze, and most importantly, the Christians. The biggest thing when it came to Assad, and I'll go on record by saying this, okay? I mean, Assad was probably, God, I hate to say this, but he was like the least problematic evil within Syria, because any other alternative is just going to be an absolute disaster. I hope I'm wrong. And if I'm wrong, you can have me on and just spend 30 minutes telling me how wrong I am. And I'll just...
Oh, I like that. Yeah, can we do that, guys?
Absolutely do that. If I'm wrong, by all means.
Hello, if you think that's right, 100% or whatever.
If I'm wrong, by all means, I will just drink vodka while you telling me how much of an idiot I am on this. But I'm sorry. I got to say that there is absolutely nothing good coming out of the fall of the Assad government in Syria. Say what you want about him, and just because you're lamenting what is going to happen in Syria does not make you a proponent, right, of the Syrian Ba'ath Party. But knowing what we have seen in Iraq and Afghanistan, and of course, my initial response was Syria is now going to Libyanize, right? If we see the Libyanization of Syria, the rise and funding of various sectarian groups, not just on religious fronts, but geographic as well. I mean, we are witnessing the death of a state. We are basically witnessing at the end of 2024.
Clarify what you mean by death of a state, though.
Death of a state, the death of a sovereign state. I mean, I'm not going to say that Syria had that much sovereignty beforehand, but considering what we see now, the carving up of the country into various spheres of influence by external powers, we were just talking before about who's the biggest winner and who's the biggest loser. I would say with the biggest loser in all of this, again, I hope I'm wrong, but it's the Syrian people, because the state was already broken after a decade of sanctions and diplomatic isolation. And we saw also how much Syria's allegedly two closest allies, Iran and Russia, just basically wiped their hands of the country once they saw the writing on the wall. And also China. China has never gotten involved. China really has no stake in keeping Assad in power.
Factor in this, it's too far for them, and they don't have
but
the
people are thinking, people are thinking in the West, people are thinking, especially Trump, right? China's the rising power, China's the rising threat, the rising hegemonic challenger to the United States. I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, China has no vested interest in keeping Assad around. So, in many respects,
China doesn't want instability. They don't care who leads Syria as long as there's no disruption and it doesn't, affect their economic and political interests in their near abroad in the Southeast Asia. Which why would it? Their biggest problem, I think, was over the Gulf of Aden and the Houthis' interferences with global shipping lanes, because that was a mess for their economic interests. Mm-hmm. But China doesn't shit about Syria. I mean, Russia much more, but China did. If you look at the way the UN records, right? Yeah, go on.
I mean, the way that I see it, as far as Russia is concerned, and initially, you had reached out to me saying, isn't it kind of funny how quiet Russia is on all of this, right? Just right after Aleppo was taken. And, I texted you back by saying, listen, by the time we figure out a time to sit around and talk about this, the whole war might be over. And lo and behold, that's exactly it. I mean,
well, I reckon it'll be early next week, but it was over before. I thought maybe Sunday, right? It'd be over by Sunday. It was over with bloody Saturday. I was actually out. Sorry, a bit of a story time, kids, but I was out on, it's a Saturday night. I was having some wine with some friends in a bistro, and it's like I just end up blowing them off and sort of sitting like on my phone, just tweeting and saying all this stuff, because they literally, I didn't think they were going to take it in the night. I thought they were going to do, and this is another comparison I wanted to bring in, which was the Taliban. Right? How much is this similar to 2021 with the Taliban takeover and the rapidity of it, the rate at which it changed? I'm not saying that the outcome is going to be similar. I think Syria has more opportunity to be reintegrated, re-legitimized in the international sphere than Afghanistan does. But, I didn't think they would do it in the night. I thought they would leave it until the day, but Assad seemingly fled at around 2:30, 3 a.m. UK time last night. So yeah, there's that. But yeah, so you think that China is largely indifferent. What about Europe though? Because this does affect Europe for the migration potential impact.
Well, the European leaders are, predictably cheering on that, big bad Bashar is gone. Anna Baerbock is being Anna Baerbock. The UK is their typical response is that the bad dictator is gone, and now freedom, liberty, and democracy-ness, and whatever that happy hippy-dippy nonsense is going to reign supreme. There will be a pro-Israeli government in Syria, that they will stop terrorism and maybe kick out the Russians. I mean, this is bubble thinking, in my opinion. I think the big thing that you mentioned right now is, look, when the shit hits the fan in the Middle East, where do normal people go? They go to Europe. And in that regard, we can expect to possibly see another major influx of refugees from Syria if the security situation is not brought under control, right? I mean, right now, Damascus is kind of in a free-for-all, and the IDF is effectively gaining footholds in southern Syria. HTS is still working to neutralize the Kurdish faction in northern Syria. And there is some kind of promise that there will be democratic elections, an inclusive government. I mean, we were told the same thing when the Taliban came back to Afghanistan, right? You mentioned this. I mean, actually, what's the one big difference between Taliban and actually, there's two differences between Taliban and Afghanistan and what we find in Syria. The first is that, yes, I agree with you that Syria will probably be less isolated because it's not the Taliban. So there will be, some quick diplomatic relations of a new government that comes in. Most likely the first one to come will be Turkey. Russia will be pretty close behind, especially if it means keeping its naval presence within the Mediterranean coast. The other difference is that the Taliban took the country back in as number of days as the United States had occupied it in years. And in Syria's case, the rebels had taken the country in a number of hours as the number of years the Ba'ath Party had been in power. We're talking about a 60-year reign basically coming unraveled in 60 hours. I mean, just complete blitzkrieg from north to south. And any kind of expectation that there would be some final, battle royale in Damascus was just completely shattered as soon as the armed forces had just decided that they're not going to defend this country. So we also have to take into account how many elements within the old Assad regime have now defected to the new incoming government, and how genuine are they in any kind of lofty ideas of inclusive democracy in a country that is largely propped up now by countries that have zero interest in democracy at all, including the United States.
Oh, here we go. Okay. I mean, I don't know. I think it's hard to tell really what could be the realistically. I mean, I also actually, before I go into that or we start exploring that bit, I want to maybe think about Libya as a case study as well, because there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from Libya in this instance, which is that when there was a centralized figure of power, namely Gaddafi, right? I know there are differences in terms of the way he was removed and etc. But what did it lead to? It led to a civil war in Libya for about 8 years. And near the latter half of that, the United Nations and whatever Western coalition were trying to establish elections and have a peaceful transition of power. And that never happened because there was constant infighting and there was constant General Haftar, I believe, who was on the other side, who was more aligned and supported by Moscow and Syria, actually, were undermining that. So basically that led to, complete and utter anarchy. And what was a country that you may not have liked the fact it was led by a despot, it was still a functioning state and contributed oil and whatever economic input to the global economy to nothing, right? And so I'm very fearful that such a thing could still develop in Syria. You've got a lot more factions involved. You've got a lot more players involved externally, right? This isn't Libya where there weren't as many external factors. Turkey is very interested in ensuring that the Kurds don't get more confident in their interests in the northeast. The Iranians may still try to do something here and there. The Israelis are, as we've said, about Golan Heights. Russia is the overarching sort of, I'm not saying, well, I think Russia's great power projection is certainly waning, but they are still, the more influential power relative to, say, the US. So you've got all these elements here that could make it even more complicated, let alone the internal factions as well. So I'm very concerned about this deteriorating into an even worse situation, right? Just a return to civil war again, because you've got warlords and militia leaders and Johnny or whatever his name isn't able to get a lid on it unless they just are like, okay, we're going to hold elections now, which I don't know if that would be realistic, but I hope that they would, and I hope that the Syrian people would have more input in that way. But maybe that's me wishfully thinking. What's your take on the Libyan lesson?
The Libya lesson is kind of where I see Syria going. Again, I've said in the beginning, I'm going to preface a lot of things what I say with, I hope I'm wrong. In this case, I hope I'm wrong. I mean, we can't just simply just say that it's going to be the, a one-to-one scenario. I mean, Syria is, I would say, a more cohesive country. There is a greater sense of national unity. But that could all come undone You know, it from outside factions can certainly, you know, instigate a lot of internal problems within the country. And certainly the understanding with Assad being in power for as long as he was is that, you know, he's the strong dictator that keeps a lid on everything, right? He keeps the Druze and the Alawites and the Christians and the Shia and the Kurds protected against the crazy Sunnis. Well, we've got to a point now where we've got the potential crazy Sunnis that are coming to power. And, you know, if this is a kinder, gentler, more family-friendly Al-Qaeda that comes in, which, by the way, think about this, you know, about like, you know, 20 plus years ago, if you were to look into the future and say that Al-Qaeda is one of the good guys toppling a government in the Middle East, I mean, I would be like, I really would like to know what happens between now, you know, 2001 and, you know, and today. I don't know, maybe I'm a cynical SOB. But I don't have a lot of faith that this scenario is going to work out. Best case scenario is that we might get, instead of a Libya situation, we might get a Lebanon situation, a type of centrifugal democratic structure in which every little town and neighborhood and district is defined by religious, linguistic, you know, political affinity, in which case, you know, every little group tries to assert their claims on, you know, some area of the country and nothing gets accomplished. We like to look at Lebanon as one of the better examples of, you know, multi-ethnic, multi-religious coexistence. And that is, of course, looking at a lot of paltry examples within the Middle East. But Syria it's multi-ethnic, it's multi-religious, it has an incredibly large Christian community as well. What role will they play in this new government? And we need to understand that a lot of the minority communities within Syria allied with Assad and the Ba'ath Party, knowing that this government, as authoritative and as brutal as it is, protects them. Are they going to be stigmatized by the new incoming groups that see them as old Assad allies, as old Assad stooges? Now, we like to think that within this rapid political social change, that somehow a bunch of founding fathers will come out and etch something on a piece of parchment and says, here's the constitution to a new state. Doesn't work like that. Does not work like that. All right. Into this lack of security comes high degrees of vigilantism, comes opportunism as well. And as I said before, some of the biggest countries that are now invested in a post-Assad Syria are not democratic at all and have little to no interest in legitimate democracy, unless that government comes to power through elections and is either pro-Ankara, pro-Tel Aviv, or pro-Washington.
I don't know if Ankara I would put quite in the same bracket as Tel Aviv. I still think that Turkey is what Erdogan is, Erdogan, whatever. I don't really care how his name's pronounced. I don't like him. I don't think that they have quite the same, you know, alignment. They're well, he's an opportunist, right? He's snaky, as you said. He's a snake oil salesman, as another guest I've had on the show called Emre Uzlu has called him. He's a snake oil salesman, right? Yes. And I think that Turkey's going to hedge its bets in terms of trying to maximize what it can gain from both, Washington in terms of its limited. Washington will probably leverage Turkey and Israel as its main foot soldiers to sort of do things, but you know, Turkey's also going to try and play a game with. Well, I think we should also talk about the Gulf states, the Arab states, a little bit. Because depending upon how they behave, that may well not be something that Turkey's okay with. I would say Turkey has a complicated relationship with the rest of the Middle East. This whole idea of Greater Turkey or pan-Turkish sort of idea, or great neo-Ottomanism. So that's the word I'm looking for. This whole idea Erdogan's been pushing for many a year now. It's not really received quite well by many other Muslim nations in the region. So even though Turkey believes it sort of it can lead the way, and it does have the most powerful military, I suppose, but still. And then obviously there are the Russians, right? The Turkish-Russian relationship is competitively cooperative, as I've heard one academic call it, which I quite like, right? Because they have a lot of things that overlap in terms of they have rivalries in the Caucasus, but they do have similar ideas in sort of, what they want to achieve. They're both semi-authoritarian kind of systems. Well, on paper, right? Russia's more than Turkey, but so I don't know. I think Turkey is certainly going to be leveraged by the US, but I think they're also going to be cheeky and try to patch things up with the Kremlin, because I don't think they have the best relations at the moment. I wouldn't say they're terrible, but they're frosty, right? They're complicated after the jet that was shot down, and the two have never really seen eye to eye. So yeah, exactly, Martin. Turkey sits on the fence, right? They sort of they balance on the fence and try to dip in and out a little bit whenever it suits them. But yeah, I think, what about the Gulf states, in your opinion? There, maybe if we pivot to that, and then obviously we can come towards the big luminescent Russian topic, if you want.
The thing with the Gulf states, the thing with the Arab states, is that Syria was the only country up until a few days ago that was the only Arab country that seemed to have any kind of, teeth. And I think that was the problem. Most of the other Arab countries are beaten down. They are loyal allies of the United States and quiet allies of Israel. The Gulf states are largely left alone as long as the oil is pumping and the casinos in Dubai are running. Nothing there like that. Jordan is little more than a colony of Israel, and Egypt talks a lot but does nothing. I mean, you can see this over the past year. Not a single Arab country has done anything other than provide rhetorical criticism of what is effectively genocide of the Palestinian people. They haven't done a single thing. They have not cut diplomatic relations. They have not threatened military intervention. For all this talk about pan-Arab unity or about, Muslim brotherhood, whatever it is, Palestinians, you want to talk about who are the biggest losers in all of this. It's the Palestinians, who have been, in the words of, Hannah Arendt's work, The Origins of Totalitarianism. I mean, they've been reduced to just non-humans. They've just been reduced. They've been dehumanized. They don't matter. It doesn't matter to them one bit. So the Arab countries will fall into line. They will call for, like it's very safe to call for, an orderly transition to a new government. Violence doesn't, solve anything. Actually, yes, it does. Violence has proven in the last couple of years to get exactly what you want. I mean, violence against the Armenians in Karabakh got Aliyev what he wanted. Violence against the Palestinians in Gaza and West Bank has gotten Netanyahu exactly what he wants. Violence against Ukraine has gotten Putin exactly what he wants. Might makes right. Congratulations, we are in, once again, the realm of neo-realism, which is the reason why John Mearsheimer is just taking one victory lap after another in this day and age.
Oh, that's not going to be well received by my audience. I know that a lot of people are not big fans of Mearsheimer, but I think he has as uncomfortable as some of his perspectives may be. I think it's still a necessary one to engage with, and ultimately, because I do think you're partially right. The Palestinians have been cast aside. They are one of the biggest losers in this whole development since October 7th. And I, very much, I've tried to be balanced in that, but there are many people on Twitter and other, social medias that think it's too much this way coverage or too much Y coverage and so on. So I think, they're going to be overlooked again in the sense, because you've got a nation state, a big one. I mean, Syria's not small. It's not Lebanon, and sort of ensuring that Syria remains somewhat stable and, or at least, predictable in terms of what happens to it. I did actually want to ask you one quick question, or maybe get your take on it. because I think it's a good one from Foxy, which is, how do I share it? Yeah. Will the oil gas pipeline from Qatar to Turkey now become a reality? Now, I'm not too familiar with the exact ideas of this. I don't know if you are, but you know, there have been changes in the Caucasus as well, as we said at the beginning of the year with Armenia, and that's a good. So you know, what do you think about that? And to tag on to that as we begin to pivot into Russia, is obviously the Kremlin did not come to the aid of one of its most critical allies. Syria has always voted on the side of Russia in UN Security Council resolutions without fail. And they did nothing. They didn't come. And the reason I'm raising this now is because it reminds me of, well, Nagorno-Karabakh. When Armenia activated the CSTO, the Russians did not come to their aid. And the Azerbaijanis took over Nagorno-Karabakh, and, you know, 250,000 people thereabouts had to flee. And this is a sizable shift in historical things. So anyway, Foxy's question, Turkey, Russia, let's begin to change our geopolitical trajectory towards, you know, the north.
Pipeline politics. Pipeline politics all of a sudden answers a lot of questions. As much as you rightly point out, right? Syria was in Russia's corner in voting at the UN, however rhetorical that it was, recognizing the independence of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, if I'm not mistaken, as well. But Syria's biggest asset to Russia was the 50-year lease that it had for its naval bases in the Mediterranean. And if Russia was able to keep those going in a post-Assad government, then so much the better. And you know, it kind of tells you something about great power politics. And it's not just Russia that does this. The United States is equally guilty of doing this, right? You are useful to us only as long as you are useful to us. And you know, at some point, you know, hey, you know, all is fair in love and realpolitik. Except for the United States. The United States, there's two countries the United States will never, ever, ever, ever abandon. One is Israel. The other one is the UK. Every other country at some point is also expendable. But to this point about pipelines, it's possible. It's indeed possible. I'm not familiar as much with this one as I am with Azerbaijan. And the idea, right, that Azerbaijan and Russia are now like this, right? Putin and Aliyev get along beautifully, fantastically, wonderful, never better. And why is that? Because of a north-south pipeline that is now the Caspian pipeline that is now going from Russia through Azerbaijan into Iran, down into the Persian Gulf, right? This is Russia's way of pivoting away from a European market that has largely, at least officially, right, cut economic ties with the country, although Russia is still making money through third-party vendors and such. But this also explains, or at least hints at, why Iran was also pretty quiet on this, right? Because this is really the thing. How is it that Russia and Iran did not come to Assad's aid? Is it because, one hypothesis, is that both countries don't have the capability of doing this, or that their powers and their resources and their focus is elsewhere, right? Russia is tied down in Ukraine. Iran does not want to escalate a conflict with Israel. As much as they say rhetorically, they do not want that, especially knowing that in a little more than a month, we're going to get Trump, who will give Israel every green light necessary to do what is necessary to secure the area. You've got, you know, it's one thing to claim that you are an emerging power. It's another thing to realize where your power and influence might be overextended and where that might be wasted. Focus on your strengths. And so in that regard, it is interesting how both Russia and Iran, especially Iran now, are coming up with all kinds of arguments about how, well, we tried to help Syria out. Assad didn't listen. It's his fault that the military just fell apart. It's his fault that there's too many career officers and not seasoned soldiers. What are you going to do? If they can't defend themselves, why would they? Same thing with the whole notion of Armenia and Karabakh, right? Lavrov's statement about Karabakh was, take it as is. because it's an interesting pivot after years of supporting Karabakh. And that is, if Armenia is not going to invest its own resources and its own military in defending Karabakh, and if it is going to also acknowledge that Karabakh is part of Azerbaijan's sovereign territory, then that solves our issue. Because in that case, it's an internal issue for Azerbaijan, not us. The minute Azerbaijan invades Armenia itself is the minute that they can invoke Article 5 of CTSO, and we will help them out. It is a very legalese way of saying we're hanging Armenia out to dry. Pashinyan has been rather unpredictable and is too much flirting with the West, which, you know, is going to just take a look at Georgia, take a look at Moldova. You know, how good is that going to give you? And Azerbaijan has more money and has more strategic value to Russia. It's a business transaction more than anything else.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just to respond to a couple of comments. And also, guys, if you have any questions you'd like us to tackle, then do so. I also want to just say, you know, welcome to those of you who have joined. If you missed the first half, like, where were you? What are you doing? There's nothing more important than jumping on a live stream with Piotr Geopolitics and Michael Rossi, Professor Esquire. He's not an Esquire. I just wanted to add there in that because it sounds funny. But anyway, no, so we're talking about lots of regional things. We've covered a little bit Iran. We've covered Turkey. We have covered Israel. US is sort of here in its own way. It's a bit of a, you know, enigma, I feel, the US role in this. But I think the large proportion of what we're going to talk about is Russia. But one comment that I did see, which I wanted to just address as well, is from Music Forever, like sort of the Armenia, Karabakh is the territory of Azerbaijan, Armenia. I mean, well, that's not necessarily. It depends who you ask. This is the whole point. This is why there was a conflict around Nagorno-Karabakh for several years, because it's been disputed, and 250,000 Armenians did live there. Whether or not you think it should be part of Azerbaijan is a bit different to whether it actually is or will be. So I do want to make that distinction, because the territory was never fully, you know, part of anything, right? We can go back to when the wars first started, the skirmishes first started in 94. But yeah, anyway, the point we were more trying to emphasize, because this stream is about Syria, is that the incapacity and unwillingness for Moscow, for Mr. Putin, to come to the aid of one of his biggest allies and regional, I don't know, sort of strategical points, right? Now, let's cut to the chase, Michael. What is Putin doing? Why can't he support Assad? Is there something going on? Is he distracted maybe by something somewhere else? Has Russia maybe not got the ability to project its power as widely as they suggest that they can? I'm being slightly tongue-in-cheek, guys, but I do think that this is a big blow for Russia. But equally, I'll make my couple points, and then, you know, you're welcome to push back or expand on them, Michael, which is that this could also be an opportunity for Russia. It depends on really about the naval bases, about the air base and the naval base. Sorry. You know, the anti-Assad forces have prevailed, but they may not be inclined to let Russia just stay there, right? It depends. I know we've had some updates since, but Russia has been bombing these groups as well. So it's not a simple case of Russia just says, okay, yeah, we're behind you. Maybe they just want to get rid of Russia as well. And I think that's been reflected in the rather cautious dialogue or words, rhetoric that Sergei Lavrov, the foreign secretary, has said regarding it. You know, they hope for a peaceful transition, and they're willing to and looking forward, or whatever words they use, to working with the groups, right? So I think Russia's also trying to be a little bit, try to play that thing. So, and also I think Russia could potentially even cite US support for something like the Syrian Kurds, right? In the northeast, as it would set a precedent for Russia doing something similar for, you know, other areas. I think like the Alawits, if I'm getting that right.
Yeah, the Alawite state is. There was talk about possibly creating an Alawite state out of a rump carcass of Syria. That's not happening because HTS has now largely taken over the territory there. So HTS has done its job. It is
Yeah.
absolutely his job.
I think the biggest element that will come through this from the Russian perspective is these bases, because it's a contradiction for Russia to project its power in the region effectively, because if it loses its naval base particularly, then it's really limited in its ability to maneuver in Africa and the Med, which obviously have been areas Russia's never been a naval power. That's why they never got involved in the scramble for Africa, right? They're terrestrially, we thought their land army was really effective, but obviously that's been proven otherwise, equally. So, this is not great for their naval interests either, which again is a bit of their Achilles heel. But anyway, I've said a bunch of stuff there. What do you think, Russia?
Well, one of the key things that you just touched on is that this jeopardizes Russia's ability to reach its allegedly growing influence within Central Africa, particularly the Sahel. And with the departure of French influence and the introduction of Russia influence, I mean, it never was really that strong, especially when much of Russia's security forces within the West African region are reformed elements of Wagner PMC. Right, so we're not talking about like professional Russian soldiers. I mean, these are effectively private military groups that are lending security to these fledgling governments and states. So, yeah, I mean, if Russia is able to maintain its naval presence in Syria, it is going to come at a larger cost than a week ago. Right? I think that a week ago, Russia was effectively rent-free in Syria. Like today, the incoming government may have no problem with Russia. If they say that they have provided security guarantees for Russia's naval base and airfield, you've got to also think that there has to have been something that Russia has decided to give, right? Either, monetary, whatever it happens to be. We don't know. All I can say, right, is that Russia's presence in Syria is now going to be significantly reduced as far as effectivity is concerned, because they have to share the space with the Turks, the Israelis, the Americans, and whoever comes into the fray here. But is that to say that Russia is weakening all around? Now, here we can play the game of hypothetics, right? Hypothetic number one. United States is looking for a weak place to poke Russia. They tried in Kursk. Russia didn't take the bait. Russia is still advancing in Ukraine, and they're advancing at a significant rate, to such a degree that even Ukraine's staunchest supporters are now talking about a ceasefire at the front lines, a freezing of who holds territory, some even telling Zelensky, look, you're just going to have to bite the bullet and accept the loss of Crimea and some territory. That in and of itself is a significant advantage in Russia's camp. But this is Ukraine. This is not the Middle East. In which case, I think Russia's presence in Syria was largely because no one had challenged it. Now that has happened. Right now that has happened. The United States, if we are to follow this hypothesis, is looking for a way of poking where Russia's influence is weaker. And Syria was the shatter point. Right? Syria was definitely, as well as Iran's. By knocking Syria out, you effectively, as we've already said, cut off supply lines from Iran through Syria into Lebanon. That's the big one. As far as Russia's concerned, if Iran is no longer a key player in Syrian politics, then Russia's presence there has to really be revamped as to why it's there. Which leads me to another hypothesis. And this is something that, again, you just have to think about this for a moment. If we are in an age of emerging realpolitik once again, and if we know that Trump is coming into office and he likes dealing with, top-heavy executives like this, and has said that as soon as he takes office, he's going to significantly scale back his support for Ukraine financially, militarily. He's either going to put it in the hands of the rest of Europe, or he's even gone so far as once again bring up this idea that the United States will withdraw from NATO if it just doesn't seem to be going in America's interest. Then you can probably surmise at some point some kind of transaction between Russia acquiescing on its influence, if not the Middle East, if not Iran, definitely the Levant, in return for the United States just kind of scaling back and eventually walking away from Ukraine. In which case, okay, Russia, you get Ukraine, and in return, you have no diplomatic influence on what Israel does. And you're going to put pressure on Iran to do the same thing as well. And if Iran focuses more on Central Asia, South Asia, not the Middle East, then Israel gets what it wants. The United States gets what it wants. And we end up coming into this type of great power bargaining in which, you know, if you look at realpolitik, smaller states are simply used as bargaining chips. I mean, you know, that's just Churchill versus Stalin. You take this, we'll take that. Trump versus Putin. And he'll turn this around. You know, Trump will turn this around by saying, you know, I made a deal with Putin. I created peace, whereas Biden didn't. Putin will probably be given a greater leverage in, you know, getting what he wants in Ukraine. At the absolute least, the United States may withdraw any kind of official support for Ukraine's membership within NATO, and we'll just let Ukraine just kind of bleed itself out in return for Russia's acquiescence in the. I mean, that's one hypothesis that I think would be that far-fetched.
Yeah. Okay. So that's one scenario sort of you put forward. I think that ultimately Syria is an issue which will be, you know, present for the minds of those who care enough about it, right? That's a pretentious way of saying that Ukraine will continue to be the priority. I think primarily for the US administration, but a Trump administration, they are going to want, a quick deal over Ukraine. Now, whether or not that can happen, I think remains to be seen. Personally, some of the indications, as I've had with many different guests on the channel over the past couple of weeks, you know, the signs we're getting from Trump are not sort of 100% like he's just going to completely pull out or whatever, you know, push for 100%. As we thought, you know, he put in, I forget the first name, but from General Kellogg, you know, he's put him in a position of influence, right? And that guy's made it pretty clear that they will, even if they smell any sort of, basically, if Trump thinks he's being screwed around by Putin, he's going to completely do a U-turn and up the scale of support for Ukraine, just as a sort of, well, F you, right? So, I don't think it's all cut and dry for the Kremlin in Ukraine. I certainly think that the situation is not good from the Ukrainians' perspective, and Zelensky's continued sort of vocalisms that he's open to negotiating or at least meeting Putin or talking or whatever in a way that he hasn't really been in the past few months even, I think is indicative of that. I think they're both trying to obviously play the game of, well, Trump is coming in and all this sorts of stuff. So I think it's hard to tell. But in the context of Syria, I think that Russia's going to try to primarily do this diplomatically. I don't think really there's going to be much role of military usage, hard power like that. They would have done that already. They haven't, other than a few airstrikes in the early days of the HTS-led assault. So I think that Russia's, well, it's got all its eggs in a basket, that is Ukraine. And regardless of what we can say about the struggles for Ukraine, equally they are there for the Russians. And I think that ultimately what happens in Syria is not going to affect, I think, Ukraine too much. Putin's attention is not going to be too divided from this. I mean, Assad's now in Moscow with asylum. That's largely the end of it. Russia will just engage with Syria to ensure that its strategical interests are protected, that these bases are retained, and so on. But I don't think that there's going to be some massive ruckus towards Ukraine more broadly. What could happen maybe is, again, with Turkey, for example, Turkey starts fiddling around with the Kurds relevant, and then that puts, disagreement with NATO, and then something. But that's a far-fetched sort of, I don't know, speculation that I'm not even sure how I can sort of war game that out, if that makes sense. I think, I don't know. I mean, I think it's another illustration that Putin is not great. And well, actually, I'll put this as an example, right? So one of the earliest signs I could tell that Moscow didn't have great sentiments about this whole development was because of how quiet the Kremlin was. Experience has told me, and I hope you agree with this, whenever Putin is pretty quiet, it means he doesn't really have an answer. He doesn't know what to say. He's not really sure what to think. If they send any generic diplomatic, communications, then that's just, playing safe with face, or whatever the expression is, right? But no one expected this, right? No one, not the Americans, I'm not going to go into the whole stuff about Mossad and the American, MI6 and CIA being part of ISIS and stuff like that. I get the point that Al-Qaeda came out of the Mujahideen, which was obviously America. I get that argument. But to say that this was all some kind of far-fetched plan in the making, I'm not sure. So I don't think anyone expected this rate of change. And we're all reacting, and that includes Moscow. So yeah, it's not a good day for Moscow. But as we've both said, I don't think they're the biggest losers in this. The biggest loser is Tehran by a wide margin. But, I don't know. Come back at me with any other thoughts you've got there, or disagreements.
Well, I agree with you in that it took a lot of people by surprise. Even the United States was not saying much. I mean, we were, preoccupied with the reopening of Notre Dame in Paris, then the fall of Aleppo and Damascus. Whether or not this was planned, it is sort of coincidental that Israel decides to push for a ceasefire with Lebanon a couple of days before the theater switches to Syria. So, listen, a lot of people like to think that America's global influence is waning, that it's crumbling, that this is an embarrassment for the United States over what happened in Syria. They had no idea. Listen.
Bye-bye, America. Bye-bye.
No. I mean, look, the thing is that with, empires take a long time to die out. Empires take a long time to die out. I mean, it takes sometimes generations.
It's a republic.
Yeah, sure, whatever. We're not a democracy. We're a republic. Whatever. I love that comment. Whatever. We're not even whatever. Actually, at this stage of the game, we're probably more are a republic than a democracy. If we were truly
I think you'll be offending. This is the irony. I think you'll be offending more of your American friends than I will be, right? With my accent taking the piss out of Americans, right? It's just if this was about France, this would not be a possible stream because I'd just have to take the piss out of France all the time. But anyway, sorry.
Well,
take a snap at the French whenever, you know what I mean.
Listen, you and I, we can tag team Macron. We can tag team dumping on Macron all you want. That's I have no problem with that. But no, I mean,
it's what happened in South Korea as well. What is going on in this world right now? What is happening in 2020?
Actually, the one neat thing about South Korea is that first of all, the president resigned. The beleaguered government of South Korea outlived the Syrian government by a couple of hours. So that's at least good. They can at least chalk that one up.
Okay,
but
anyway,
yeah,
Syria.
I mean, look, we got South Korea, we've got annulled elections in Romania, we've got Macron on the brink of disaster, we got Germany that's about to open the door to AfD. We've got all kinds of fun things going on in 2025.
It's just insane. I remember just the story time again. Sorry, I have some bright lights, so it's just a bit off. I don't do enough streaming this long. I usually keep my videos to 20 minutes, 30 minutes, unless it's a stream. But anyway, so story time. When I first started this channel 2 years ago, no, 1.5, yeah. Well, no, I started the channel 2 years ago. I did a live stream, but then I didn't post any videos because I was disappointed with the lack of engagement on a non-existent channel on a live stream. I was like, why is no one watching? Now I've got 1,600 of you, which is pretty cool. But anyway, sorry, that aside, I remember I made the sort of the look back. I was calling it the look back on 2022. And I was like, well, it's been a crazy year. And then Brazil was, underwent an attempted coup. I was like, oh, 23 is going to be crazy. 2024, with how many elections we've had, 60% of the world's population going to the polls. We've had a snap election in France. We've had a snap election in the UK as well. It's insane. Now it's capped off with, we've still got 3 weeks, right? I'm not counting anything out. I was also going to say, everyone, be on the lookout for a live stream I'll be doing with, some guests as part of a look back of 2024. Michael, obviously, you're welcome. I expect you to be part of that. But I keep thinking, I'll do it sort of, late December. I'm doing it December 31st at 11:59 because there might be another coup somewhere. Okay, maybe not 11:59. It won't be a very long stream, but you know what I mean. It's just ridiculous what's happening. So I'm a bit excited, animated, but I can't keep up, man. I'm trying to cover stuff.
Someone contact Tim Snyder, see if he's not, 3 bottles of vodka into depression today. So
well, precisely. And on this, Brown knows us. I do want to show this to everyone. You're the Russian George Michael. Thank you very much for that. I do appreciate that, and I have to admit that I do see occasionally comments of people saying I didn't know George Michael turned to politics. So yes, and I am singing Last Christmas quite frequently because it is my favorite Christmas song, and I love George Michael. Anyway,
well, I gotta say, Buddy is saying, Buddy is saying, I missed 2020 when we only had the plague. I kind of missed the first 3 months of 2020. Like the first 3 months of 2020, we still had hope. There was still optimism. There was still, at least for a brief period, this idea that perhaps Bernie was going to get the primary and actually get on the tickets before.
You're a communist,
huh?
Oh, yeah, you're a communist. I thought you support, John Mearsheimer, which makes you a right-wing conservative neocon or something, right?
No. I'm a doomer Marxist at this point. Okay, I'm just a doomer Marxist. All right, so you can kind of see how the world goes. I said I agree with Mearsheimer 80% of the time because he's a realist. I'm a constructivist, so you need the other 20% in order to explain why things happen the way that they do.
Wait. A social constructivist? What, that theory?
In IR theory, IR constructivism. George Wendt, Ted Hopf, constructivist theory. So basically, how do states perceive themselves in the world, and how do they perceive other countries? So it's foreign policy with adjectives, right? Realism.
I found it really interesting. But who was the original creator of that? I remember the original piece was it was first suggested by a writer in '92. I remember reading the original piece. It was done by someone. It was Wendt, right? It was Anarchy.
Yeah,
Anarchy is what states think of it. The social construction. Power politics. So to go nerdy for listeners and viewers for a second, what Michael and I are referring to is different theories of international relations. I'm sure most of you know this, but one of the basic ones you read whenever you study international relations or just broader politics like that, foreign policy, is constructivism. The 2 main schools of thought in realism, founded by, I don't know, Morgenthau, you can argue, or Kenneth Waltz, maybe, although that's a more neo-realism.
This goes back to Thucydides.
Thucydides, of course, yeah. Sorry. And then you've got liberalism or idealism, which you can argue sort of has existed as well. A lot of people point to Woodrow Wilson's, was it 19 points or whatever he said in the...
14 points, but John Locke and all that good stuff,
Oh, Thomas Hobbes, of course, as well. Yeah, so those are really interesting theories. But constructivism kind of came out of the late 90s, early 90s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the sort of the end of the Cold War, end of history, Fukuyama, and that, this began making people think, oh, well, maybe we can talk about values more, or sort of as you said, brings more adjectives into it. But I think that's really interesting. So you're a constructivist. So how would a constructivist then, let's do a bit of nerdy school thought here, look at the situation in Syria?
From the U.S. point of view, the United States still likes to, cosplay as a liberalist interventionist state. I would say Wilsonian Wilsonian realism is a good way of looking at it, right? Is that, if you're not embracing the type of human rights values that we want, we're going to go in and regime change you. And we've been doing that in Central America. We've done that in the Middle East. We've done that, across the world here. So the United States is going to look at Syria, and they're going to see this as a genuine revolution. They're truly going to believe that ISIS has gone all intersectional, and it's a kinder, gentler, more reformed version of it, because that's what the media industrial complex is telling us. And they're going to see this as something positive. Whereas if outcomes go against Western interests, it's seen as, coups, it's seen as seizure of power, it's seen as interference by countries like Russia or Iran or China, for that matter. So, and I think constructivism, in my opinion, is not so much a theory in and of itself, but it's like a downloadable mod to make existing theories work better. And whether that is liberal, because look, the United States is going to talk about freedom and democracy and this, that, the other thing, while we're absolutely bankrolling genocide in Palestine. So, don't sit there and tell me that we are a force for good in the world if we're giving blank checks to countries to commit the most atrocious war crimes since the Second World War, but then turn around and call Russia or China or Iran or Syria rogue states. And the only way to make your way through that sense of hypocrisy is the notion of constructivism, because we believe that, we're the good. When we intervene, it's for good purposes. When Russia intervenes, it's for self-interested, authoritarian purposes. When, the rest of the world kind of looks at the United States and sees it as one of the greatest threats to global security. You can agree, disagree with this. I mean, I'm not taking one position or the other here, but I just find it interesting how we continue to talk about the plight of Ukraine, and yet the very same politicians that want to give blank check after blank check to Zelensky are turning a blind eye and a deaf ear to what is happening in Palestine, and may do the same thing in Syria. And they have been doing the same thing in Afghanistan. All of a sudden, we cared about every kite runner in Afghanistan when we were there. And as soon as we pull out, who cares? Fuck them. We don't care.
This was a child-friendly show, everybody. But yeah, under international law, people to play devil's advocate on Palestine. I think that the West has not, when push comes to shove, interests always prevail over values. But what I do think this event over Syria has indicated, though, and South Korea almost as a sort of separate but sort of similar theme, which is that democracies do align together quite well and interlink in a way that they're going to support one another. Maybe there is a bit of an argument to be had about the overlap of values to an extent, right? Will America sell out some of its partners and allies if it ultimately means America benefits? Absolutely, sure. But if it's more in a relative sense, then maybe not. Syria and Palestine, more specifically, I think is a situation that no one feels that they can resolve, and therefore they kind of just don't know whether they want to get their hands dirty with it anymore. Biden is not a lame duck president. He's super lame duck. And, he went to APEC, for example, a couple of weeks ago, and no one was interested. I had colleagues there, diplomats, attachés, whatever, and they're just saying, "I don't give a shit. We're not interested. Whatever Biden says is, it's all about Trump." And in this regard, Trump could really put into pressure that idea of how unified Western allies are. But the reason why I mentioned South Korea is because it showed you that if a democracy is if the institutions are well embedded enough and the belief in it in the minds of the citizens is there, then it can uphold attempts at power grabs. I think, and that's why I mentioned Brazil, because Brazil was an attempt by Bolsonaro to, exercise control, and he didn't manage that. And the Brazilian system has come out very strongly and, punished him and anyone else that was conspiring in that. And it shows you, because Brazilian people are very much, they want to live in a democratic system, right? There are variations of democracy, and I understand whether or not I'm not saying this is a clear, binary thing. It's all grey in international relations. But I think I don't know. I get what you're saying. I agree with you about Western hypocrisy all the time, but I don't know how much I go to the same lengths you do about that, if that makes sense. That was a really roundabout way of trying to sort of expand on what you said, but I don't know. I hope that the West, or the US specifically, to bring it again back to Syria so we don't deviate too much, will have constructive roles in this. But as we've both agreed on very firmly, let's not pull the wolf over the skin over our eyes in that this group of replacement, or whatever, the post-Assad bunch, are not very... I'm not very comfortable with it, Michael, is what I'm saying, right? We've got some very, very precarious individuals, some very questionable entities, and I am very worried about Syria getting worse, not better. I really hope it doesn't. And people do, this is the problem, when people don't understand the intricacies of these things. They see that you post a video or a tweet, and they think that you're, because you celebrated, and this is where I'm going to show it, because I thought it'd be entertaining, yes, Google, that's fine. Was this I went to the gym, and I went to the gym because I was hungover. And anyway, as Assad falls, I left. And it was a joke, right? It's a joke that, you know, you lift up and you fall down and that sort of stuff, right? But the joke was that, but people saw it and then they go, oh, so you're celebrating that Assad has fallen and now Islamists and extremists are coming in. No, I'm not celebrating it. I'm celebrating Assad gone, but I'm certainly not happy about, you know, what happens next. Anyway, people hear what they want to hear and see what they want to see. You know what I mean? So I don't know. What do you think? Am I talking out of my ass as usual?
Yeah, it's your fault. You screwed up. That's basically it. I'm surprised that they didn't even criticize the multicolored weights that you had on your thing there. You know, someone might question, you know, some other choices that you might embrace or not. You know.
Yeah, well, no, that was a deadlift actually. It was just
Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, so I don't know. Do you think? So do you have a pretty pessimistic view about the West then? And brown green, no, not brown green, the brown noser. No, I don't mind my views being challenged. I'm just expressing myself, you know, comprehensively against Michael's perspective. I think we're 90% in agreement here. I just think I have a lesser cynical view of the West, maybe. I don't know.
That's probably a good way of looking at it. So it's not that my views are challenged.
Maybe it's more I just live in you know, ignorance. I'm a young hothead who doesn't know anything. So anyway,
well, you live in the UK. At the end of the day, you've got NHS that doesn't make you go bankrupt if you get sick. Okay.
Oh, brown noser meant you. Oh, okay. So it's all your fault, Michael. Oh, okay. Thanks, brown noser. Anyway, yeah. Anyway, I don't know. What else can we say? I don't know. Where do you think? What do you think will happen most likely in the next?
What do I think will happen at this point? I mean, it's now basically a bingo card. You know, who had what before the end of the year here. I mean, we've got protests still going on in Georgia. We have a suspended election in Romania. We've got upcoming parliamentary elections in Germany. We've also got new parliamentary elections in Kosovo territory, in which Serbian list is saying they're going to participate, which will pretty much spell the end of Kurti's little cosplay imperialism up in the north there. Things are going to get interesting. I mean, to say the least. You know, I was thinking about what country today actually exemplifies probably the best example of successful liberal parliamentary democracies. And I mean, aside from, let's say, maybe small Alpine countries or Scandinavian countries, I mean, you know, some of the big heavy hitters now are falling under, you know, either gatekeeping to keep the alleged crazies out, or we've let the crazies in, and it's now kind of a free-for-all as to where we're going to go. You know, speaking of Biden, it's interesting in the sense that Biden wasn't even at the Notre Dame opening. Trump was. Like, he's already practically acting as the next president before he's, you know, reinaugurated. And yet, you get this sense from Biden that, oh, we're working hand in glove with the incoming Trump administration. We want a smooth transition of power, it's just because, we love the sanctity of our institutions. But, if anybody was somehow thinking that Biden was going to use the last few weeks in office to do something good, other than pardon his fail son, a bunch of other things, then, they're sorely mistaken, because at the end of the day, they just don't care about you. They care about upholding the system. They care about protecting overseas security interests, and democracy. Actually, the best example of democracy, the best example of people power that I've seen in the last couple of days was in South Korea, when the president was going to declare martial law and the public was like, that ain't going to happen. Like, we are literally going to storm the parliament, and we are going to create a human pyramid to allow the MPs to climb over us and over the wall so they can get into parliament and vote against martial law. Like, that was pretty cool. Like, that was
sure. No, but that's what I'm saying. I was, as with all the negativities and disasters that we've been having in the past year, or in 24, right? That was a minor degree of optimism or reassurance, right? That, people will not allow well, he was an idiot. I'm not even going to say he was like some, oh, what an idiot, President Yoon. Like, what was it, 6 hours between the time when it was over? It was a masterclass in how not to do things, and it reminded me of the sort of How to Make Enemies or whatever that film is, and I just it's great. It was just hilarious, but I was so buoyed to see the South Korean people be so vehemently against this, and the whole opposition, and most of his own bloody party, right? Mm-hmm. You might have different views, and I am very worried about the direction of America. I'm not just being anti-Trump or something, but I do worry about the division, maybe the polarization within that's being bred. Biden has done a pretty poor job, I think, in areas. He's done some interesting stuff, other areas, but yeah, so that was a real big positive. But now I do worry about the future of Syria. I hope that, there can be some peaceful transition, some pragmatic and effective decision-making made by the relevant actors with, and let's be honest, it's probably not going to, but, we can hope, altruistic input from external powers, right? That's what I hope, that, the UN maybe comes in and helps transition, and everything goes swimmingly. And maybe we could see a division of the country. I don't know. Could we see a fragmentation in Syria? The northeast becomes some kind of Syrian Kurdish state, or could they be an autonomous region within Syria itself, and they at least have more governance, even though it's still within the nation state of Syria? Are these possibilities?
There's always possibilities. In fact, one big thing that we need to look for is that if it gets to a point where there's an international agreement on a solution for Ukraine that includes border adjustment, then the Westphalian system that has been embedded in international law since 1945, with one or two exceptions, is no longer sacrosanct, which means that the borders of Syria can be in question. This is actually bad news for Serbia in terms of laying claim to some kind of sovereign legitimacy over Kosovo. We may even see, and I really don't want to go this far down the rabbit hole, but I mean, it's not good for Bosnia. Now. Yeah, we're not. It's not good for Bosnia either. I mean, it's really not good for Bosnia. So,
Wait, let me ring up James Kerr-Lindsay, who we've also had on the show with you as well. We can talk about that with him. So, everyone, if you're not familiar with James, he's another friend of the channel who we do a lot of events with. But yeah, we've had him and Michael on. But anyway, so he's an expert in Bosnia and all Balkanese issues. But yeah, so that's an interesting point, though. And I did see a comment which I think brings in this nicely as well, which is that the West, it's not just the US. No, of course not. It's not just the US. But I don't think I don't see Europe having as much of an immediate leadership in this. Sure, they can provide aid. They might be more, should we say, passively involved in the sense of a humanitarian support, maybe, to try to mitigate Syrian, the new Syrian, whatever, government entity leadership, not just opening the floodgates of more migrants. They'll probably engage with them there. But I mainly emphasize the US, because they're more likely, under Trump at least, to make a proactive interventionary kind of thing through, be it diplomacy or military, because they're physically on the ground. Right? Europe, I don't believe, has any military assets in Syria. I don't think so.
Not that I know of.
Yeah, so I don't think they had any remaining in northeastern Syria. They didn't get that involved in the Syrian civil war in the 2010s. So I'm not sure, but anyway, it's a good point about the sort of what it means for statehood and self-determination like that, for sure. Yeah,
there might be the only, I mean, if it gets to this point, I really hope that it doesn't. But if the EU, and it's going to be the EU, it won't be a European country, in my opinion. I think it's going to be largely the European Union's foreign office.
Yeah.
Sure. What they tend to do is they try to find this cumbersome compromise in which they want to maintain the territorial integrity of the state, but they will push for some kind of like power sharing, some kind of consociationalism, right? So we could possibly see talk of a federal republic of Syria, right, in which Damascus is more of a federal capital, and there is power that is devolved to the Kurdish regions, the Druze regions, sort of like a Lebanon type scenario, or a Bosnification of the situation. It has its strengths. It has its drawbacks, because it effectively kills any kind of internal sovereign cohesiveness of the state, especially if you start drawing internal boundaries along religious and ethnic lines, as what happened with Bosnia at the Dayton Accords. But this is one option that I wouldn't be surprised is at the absolute least fielded. Right. I don't know about that. Obviously, the big exception to all of this, if the West is going to, all come out in favor of, territorial cohesiveness, like they did with, Ukraine and stuff. I mean, the whole Serbia-Kosovo thing completely negates this steadfastness, which, when you've had James on, I mean, we agree on this. This is probably one of the worst things that ever happened, was effectively giving premature statehood outside of any UN guarantees to Kosovo. So it remains this disputed territory, this disputed parastate. I don't see that happening in Syria unless you end up having not formal separation of territory, but as I sort of suggested before, internal spheres of influence that permeate various geographic regions of the country, with a very weak center in Damascus, like you would have in Lebanon, right? So southern Lebanon is practically a separate entity with Hezbollah, which works with other political parties. It works with other groups. Don't get me wrong. It's not like this terror state, right? They end up working with other political groups and ethnicities. But Hezbollah has far more say over, what is said in Beirut. We see this with Iraq as well, with the establishment of an autonomous Kurdish region in the north, spheres of Sunni regions in the center, and of course, Shia-dominated areas in the south. And then, of course, when these things become, ethnic enclaves, you get commentators in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Atlantic and the Economist basically saying that these areas will never democratize because of ancient ethnic hatreds and religious animosities. And it's like, well, these divides, these barriers were created by the outside, either for divide and conquer, or as a way of trying to stop the killing, right? The immediate aftermath of any conflict is not conflict resolution, but conflict management. And if you simply separate people into various little ethnic, religious, and cultural enclaves where they're not fighting each other, well, then mission accomplished. You have a negative peace, not a positive peace, but it's one that stops the immediate conflict. The problem is that once you reach that solution, these now become institutionally entrenched. And like Lebanon and Bosnia, Northern Ireland, and any other, Kosovo, wherever it is you want to look at it, right? It pays to play the ethnic card when you are running for elections. There's very few, people are looking at Bosnia saying, why don't we have an all Bosnian inclusive political party? Doesn't work. It just does not work. You play to you play to your ethnicities, and this is what might happen in Syria if the country remains whole, if the country is not internally at war with each other, and if the country does not contribute to the regional security dilemma. Then, as far as international powers are concerned, what do they care about the effectiveness of the state? As long as it's not bothering anybody else.
Yeah, no, that's I think that's the crux of what we should emphasize, is that ultimately it's about stability. It's about longevity of this going forward, and that it doesn't revert to Syria civil war that has plagued the country for the whole of the 2010s. Right, I started my undergraduate at University of Nottingham in 2012, I think it was. And this and our first case studies that we were using to understand what it meant for international relations and applying the theories was to the Arab Spring, and Syria was the case in point. And it's been a defining part of my academic and professional journey. As I always think about, it's never something that I've been an intricate expert over Syria, but it's always been in the back of my mind that there is a conflict ongoing that no one is, and people who said, well, the Syrian civil war restarted last week. No, it didn't. It never stopped. They never signed a formal ceasefire armistice. Yes, you can tell that the rebels were in and around Idlib and holding out, but it was still a war. It just wasn't, it was an internationally armed conflict, or IAC under international law terms, right? So, yeah, anyway, that's me being pedantic, but yeah. So no, I really hope that the country can just stabilize. But again, it brings us back to this point, which I think is most important, which is that ridding it of Assad doesn't mean that it's good now. You've got a bunch of power people and a bunch of factions, which, yes, this one HDS guy is seemingly the most ready, but is he ready to lead the whole country? No, I don't think so. And I don't think there's going to be 100% support for him anyway. So I don't know. It's really hard to tell. I did want to say to everyone watching, if you're enjoying it, then do, drop the video a like, do subscribe to Michael or myself if you resonate with what we're saying. Even if you don't, I think it's good to challenge your views. And I don't do echo chambers too much. I'm not going to interview Jackson Hinkle, for those of you who will be triggered by that name, but I will interview people who have an alternative perspective, because I think it's worth that. But yeah, if you have any questions for me or Michael, drop them in the comments below. And I guess, yeah, I hope, a sort of semi-autonomous, maybe Kurdish territory can emerge. Syria is, unified, but maybe a federalist state. Maybe it has a pragmatic government that leans both ways. That's what we'll have to see, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one, right? Any final thoughts? Maybe we've been going for a good 90 minutes there, Michael.
Yes.
So,
I'm going to say this. I think you have a more optimistic assessment of the country than I do. And again,
I'm not optimistic. I'm just
hopeful.
I mean, I'm optimistic. Does hope mean optimism? I don't know. I want the best for the country. That's what I'm saying, regardless if it leads.
I think we both do. I mean, I want the best for the country. I don't want an exodus of Syrian Christians. I don't want wide-scale ethnic cleansing of various minorities. But a lot of that is also going to have to hinge on the choices and decisions of the two major power brokers, Turkey and Israel. And if Turkey simply wants to do to northern Syria what they've done to their own Kurdish regions, which is, seasonal bombing campaigns, then the country is going to remain unstable. And, as far as Israel is concerned, I mean, here's the thing that's really the most depressing thing, is that Netanyahu is not a rogue individual within Israeli politics. If he is thrown out of power, there's a very likely chance that we can get people like Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, and others who are open aggressive Zionists, who will have absolutely no problem in calling for the full annexation of the Golan Heights and continued occupation of southern Syrian territory. And they will get carte blanche support from a Trump administration. So the future of a peaceful Syrian state rests a lot with the decisions coming out of Ankara and Tel Aviv.
Interesting that you highlight those two most of all. I think Ankara is going to be, absolutely there. Israel, just because of its proximity, if they were to annex and try to, instill some kind of buffer zone along there, that's going to really make things a mess. And I would not be on side of that. But I think it reminds me also of the Ethiopian civil war when I was working in crisis group. When that first started, and we were doing a lot in the UN system about that. And the more I read into Ethiopia and the complexities around that, the biggest hope, because there's sort of more regions want autonomy. And so it goes through this, well, this would be interesting to have James's take on. But, for me, a country of that complexity, because of all the nationalities as they're called down there, which I guess you can argue what might be called also ethnicities, sort of Tigray, the regional province of Tigray, would be an autonomous region, but within the federal system of Ethiopia, right? Because that meant that there wasn't a long-term over potential risk of conflict, because they try to break away, but they still have enough autonomy. Obviously, that goes on the presumption that the government in the capital would be nice enough to let them keep that. You don't do a stupid Catalonia from 2017 and just try to arbitrarily announce independence, which is bizarre. But so I want the Kurdish people to have more representation, right? I get that's the bottom line I'm trying to get at here. But I'm also worried about what that would do in terms of triggering Ankara. And also, so maybe to keep everybody happy as a compromise. I know compromises are crap for some people, but they have more autonomy, but they're still part of the nation state that is Syria. I don't know.
Well, one thing we have to also keep in mind here is that if all of this hinges on what happens in Ankara, Erdogan, inshallah, is either going to lose power at some point or die. His days, he's not Yungin anymore. And he's not popular. He's not popular in Turkey. His party wins because the opposition remains divided and without any real forward-thinking objective beyond just simply romanticizing Kemalism. But let's say he finishes out his term in office, and he steps down, he retires, whatever, and you have the opportunity for fresh elections. Now, let's play the hopeful scenario. Let's say that in the immediate future, the Kemalist party, the CHP, comes in, right? The secularists. And let's say that they have a different approach on Turkey's trajectory within the larger Mediterranean, Aegean, Middle Eastern region. Are they going to continue to support these mercenary for hire groups that Erdogan's AKP has done? Are they going to be as hardline as they are towards the Kurds, not just in Turkey, but also in Syria and Iraq, right? We find that it's tempting to think that what is now is going to be the way it is for the foreseeable future. And then suddenly, boom, something happens, right? Something happens, somebody loses power. There is an uprising. There is some deus ex machina that ends up happening here. If Erdogan leaves power, all right, he either retires, he dies, whatever, AKP just basically falls apart. We could possibly see a different approach from Turkey, not just towards Syria, but also towards, let's say, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Russia. There could also be a re-engagement, perhaps, with the European Union. There's talk about, is Turkey going to, leave NATO? Is Turkey going to join BRICS? I mean, all of this is contingent on who's in charge. And you remember that in the beginning of this year, Argentina was poised to join BRICS. And then there were elections and Javier Milei comes in, who is, super uber libertarian guy, and is like, no, I'm not joining that. As a matter of fact, I love America, I love the dollar, and I love Israel. So screw all of you. And, there it is. So things can change. things can change, as we've seen in the last couple of days. Things can change very, very fast. I remember back in the, well, I'm not that old, but I remember I was in grade school at the time. It was the 1980s. And there were analysts called Sovietologists. You can only imagine how much in demand they are today. Sovietologists were basically saying about a week before things in 1989 happened that, guys, make your peace with it. Soviet Union is going to be around for a long time. Communism is a reality. It's just going to be. And then suddenly, boom, it wasn't. The government of Czechoslovakia collapses in 2 weeks. No one knew in early 1989 where most of these other governments were going to go. And before you know it, they've all transitioned into something else, some for the better, some for the worse.
Yeah, I think it's, I think in this instance, we can have wishful thinking about what would happen in that regard. Erdogan his popularity has been significantly on the decline. He won that election just last year, which we had a good conversation about with a Turkish expert, Gunol Tol, and I remember thinking, well, that's it. Erdogan is going to command leadership, but his leadership ratings, I think rankings in the past even couple of months have been pretty dire. So I do think, if there were another election for whatever reason, he's not going to win it again. Well, he'll interfere. I'm sure he'll fiddle with it. But on Argentina, actually, I just wanted to make a little note for anyone who's watching. If you happen to be from Argentina, I'll be visiting in about 3 weeks. I'm very excited to be spending some of the festive season around Argentina, Uruguay, and maybe Paraguay if I can get to the Iguazu Falls, I think it is. So if you have any recommendations, people, then drop me a message or a comment, and I'll love to, love any tips. But that's just because you mentioned Argentina. So maybe, I don't know, maybe there's someone I can interview. Maybe we can do some interviews personal. I need to get to Uzbekistan or the stateside to meet you as well, Michael, for a chat. So there's so many factors here, which is why I guess we've spent an hour and 40 minutes talking about it, right? I would expect that length for something like Russia, right? The size of its country and influence, but Syria, it's not that. But I've never seen, I think, a conflict, the civil war, which had more moving pieces to it. I think it was the most complicated modern conflict of our time, because you had layers of people internally, but then the layers, the network. I shared that stupid image on one of my videos, that sort of the US is on the same side as Russia because they're fighting ISIS, but they're against one another because they want to keep Assad and the US wants him gone. Turkey's in there doing its thing. And to your point about Turkey leaving NATO, I don't think they're not leaving NATO. It's far too much of a strategic message for them. BRICS is overblown. It's not a military alliance, guys. It's a forum where countries get together to talk about how they mutually hate the West and want to overthrow the US-led order, which is gaining momentum, but there's also been some setbacks in recent months. But I'm still curious to see if they can bring out some currency. But anyway, maybe we can have another talk about the BRICS some other time. I know we like to bitch about that. So we've got a question for you, Michael. Why did it's a bit of a there's a bit of a provocative question here. I don't know if you want.
Why did Argentinian Milei go to the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem and suddenly the Argentinian was back on track? Whom was he appeasing?
Okay, so it's an Israeli Jewish, the Zionists are behind the Argentinian recovery, I think is what he's suggesting. Are they?
I could be wrong. I think he was even thinking about converting to Judaism or something like that. I'm not sure. I heard that
really?
somewhere. But it's one of those things where, look, Abraham Lincoln once very succinctly said that you should not trust everything you read on the internet. So, I just...
Yeah, no. Well, all right, guys. I think what we'll do is probably wrap it up there for tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure, Michael. I always enjoy these marathon streamers with you. And thank you very much for coming back, everyone. If you've enjoyed it, and as I've said before, do consider, subscribing, liking the video, ring the bell. I find it, as a Brit, I find it incredibly, it's like a Brit asking for money or something. We're too polite. We're too sort of awkward about it, right? But, apparently if you don't say subscribe, then the little shiny subscribe button on YouTube doesn't light up and do all fancy stuff. So I'm just going to say it and own it. And the last thing I did want to say is, Michael, are you on Blue Sky?
No, not
Get
not
Blue Sky.
yet, and I don't know if I should.
Guys,
You know?
get Blue Sky. I don't work for the company. This is not some sort of paid ad. But if you are struggling, I'm going to be very particular with my words. But if you're on the fence about X, Twitter as it currently stands, and you want somewhere that is, I'm not leaving Twitter. I never said I would. And people jumped to the conclusions and said, oh, Snowflake, he's running away from Twitter. No, I'm not. I'm just diversifying. And Blue Sky seems to be the Threads is nothing. It's just weird AI stuff constantly on there. Blue Sky seems to be a good place to find information and share stuff. So if you want to follow me on Blue Sky, you can do so. Well, just download the app. I recommend it. You get these cool starter pack thingies, which are basically like, you know, you bring a bunch of people together. So these are my geopolitical go-tos. And once Michael joins, I can add him in there as well, and stuff. So they've got a lot of interesting people on there, and it's just a little bit less, well, ads sometimes, or just Elon Musk's face everywhere. Whether or not you like Musk, I think we can objectively agree he does like posting on there, and it dominates the algorithm because that's the way he's changed it. So if you want sort of information from people that you actually follow and not just for you, I recommend you check it out. And Michael, I encourage you to get it as well. But that's just a little shout out to joining us on Blue Sky. Michael, any last words, any takeaways? What's coming up on your channel? Let us know.
I mean, I know that as far as the translation stuff is concerned, Putin will be giving his end of the year assessment, which is always a good 4-hour thing for me to look at and see whether or not it's worth doing the whole thing or not. But I will, if there is some major events coming as far as Syria is concerned or Ukraine, once the semester is done and I'm done grading papers, I can go back to some like individual videos rather than just doing some primary source translations. I agree with you that we have 3 weeks left in the year, and I'm not counting anything out at this point. So things are just incredibly interlocking pieces that one thing will lead to another. So I don't know. I have no idea. But one thing is for certain, this profession is not boring. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah. But yeah, guys, that's it from me. I'll be posting a video with a summary of what we've talked about with Michael here in probably about half an hour on an actual video, sort of who are the winners, who are the losers. And we'll be doing more on Syria. I'm looking to collaborate with a couple of people who cover Syria as well. And also, we've got a lot more collaborations coming up. And I'm going to start, this is actually a little fun announcement as well. Going to start doing things. I found a venue in London where I'm currently based. And so we're going to start doing things in person. So if you happen to be in the UK, keep a lookout for that. And Michael, you obviously expect you to fly all the way from America land or Uzbekistan land to be there as well. But guys, summary: Russia kind of loses, might be able to get away with mitigating it. Turkey is the biggest winner, but not 100% yet. Depends on the Kurds. Israel could come out of this quite well, but it's not over for them, depending upon what their cabinet chooses to do. The US doesn't have too much of a say on this, but will certainly be seeking how, well, it depends on Trump. And the biggest loser, I think we can largely agree, is the Iranians. So that's it from us, everyone. We'll speak soon, and I look forward to seeing you all in the future streams. Take care, everyone.